You look nervous.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good night, happy Easter, whatever day it is when you're watching this program, wherever you are. Welcome to our little corner. I don't know where Calvin took me this time, but I guarantee I felt like I was on a quarter-mile dirt track coming off the main macadam road to get down here. We are at the Woodman Lodge, whatever number it is. What number is it?
462.
462, said the gallery. In Chazy, not very far, maybe about 2 miles as the crow flies from Minor Institute, which would be well known as a landmark to people around the North Country. And we came here not to sign you up for Woodman Insurance, but to talk a little bit about Airborne Park. My goodness. This guy next to me, John Walker, called me, I don't know, what was that, a month or two ago, John?
Probably a month ago, yep.
Said, Gordy, I got an idea. And when he told me what the idea was of getting down on tape a chronicle of the history of this wonderful North Country Speedway, what did I say?
You thought it would be a great idea.
I'm ready. Get them all. I said, get them all. We'll get together. And we had a plan for a Saturday, which would have been last week in real time and around the 21st of August. And guess what? Gordy had to leave town to go to a 50th wedding anniversary down in Charleston, South Carolina. And so Calvin did a few interviews, and you were there, John.
I was there.
And those interviews will be seen later today. Who did he talk to at that time?
He talked to Mr. Broderick, who founded Airborne Park Speedway, and he talked to the current owner now, Tom Curley, from the American Canadian Tour.
So, and then we got a couple of people to interview on this program later today, which we're going to bring over after you and I chat. Who are they going to be?
We have Mr. John Paul Cabana, who's, in my mind, probably the most instrumental Canadian driver ever to come to this area. Not only that, he's an idol of mine, because I'm a very big fan of his. And we have Mr. Charlie Trombley, who's going to be on. And I wasn't too keen on the idea of these two getting together, because I wasn't sure what the past was like with these two. So
just because they're fighting a civil war down in Charleston these days, these wars are long since past.
Well, I've heard some stories of about before I was born, and the first thing I did when Calvin told me he was going to get Mr. Trombley was call John Paul and say, "Is it okay?" So everybody's happy. We're going to have a good time, and they are going to share some stories, share some facts, and hopefully everybody will enjoy it.
It's going to be a great night, I can tell you that. We got a picture lying down here that reminds me of the old days, like 22 years ago, the Airborne Speedway. But before 32 years ago, okay.
45 years ago is when the track
it
was
started.
open.
But this is a 1967 photograph of what the track looked like. And as Charlie said, and we're going to talk about later, one of the finest tracks in the Northeast and some of the greatest stock car racing in America, right here, way back in 1954. You don't go back to 1954.
I don't. I go back to a month before this picture was taken.
What a baby. What a baby.
So, again, back when Charlie and John Paul were running, you're right, this was one of the biggest racetracks probably in the nation as far as competition, and hopefully John Paul's on board with us now with the company. We can bring it back to that. There's not too many racetracks in the United States that are this old and have this much prestige to them.
Like a lot of my old schools, like every school I ever went to doesn't exist anymore. They all got torn down. I guarantee a lot of the old tracks are gone. Just out of here. Every time I drive through Fort Covington, I look over there and say, yes, I can remember a few fights in the infield when the tire irons were flying. I mean, things were just wonderful back in those days, and exciting and fun. And I don't mean that fighting is wonderful, but for fans, there was tremendous excitement. And Charlie and John Paul will remind us later on in this interview that there were a lot of very good drivers and a lot of very good cars, and some of the top automobile mechanics in the country were building these cars in barns and garages around the North Country with very little money compared to what the cars cost today.
It's a big difference from what it was back then compared to what it is now. The main thing that I think should be stressed is this racetrack back then had a lot of competition, had a lot of fan-oriented type things going on. They really put on a good show. And today we're trying to do that same very thing. And as you'll find out in this interview, not for very much more money for the adult to get in. So hopefully Mr. Cabana and Mr. Trombley are going to.
Well, before we get to them, he thinks he's going to get out of this. No, I'm not getting on. You're on, baby.
I'm on.
I want to know how you got involved with this stock car thing. Were you a fan as a little kid, or how did this all get started with you?
Probably as a fan. I live about 2 miles from this racetrack, and I can remember my father being on the safety crew years and years and years ago. In fact, I can remember probably sitting on one of them things one night after the races. But yeah, I've always been there. I've been there through the transition of asphalt to dirt to asphalt. Each individual owner I've worked for at one time or another since the 70s. I'm sorry, and just want to keep it going. I want to see it keep going. It's been around a long time. We want to keep it around a long time.
Fans of this program called Our Little Corner know we thrive on history. And we're doing things about the Battle of Plattsburgh and the War of 1812. And even though Airborne doesn't go back that far, it does go back to 1954.
54.
And my history with Airborne goes back almost that far. Because as a 17 and 18-year-old high school student in Moira, New York, which is, like 65 miles away from Plattsburgh, I knew about this racetrack and came to the races every single week. And then I got a job helping to build the Plattsburgh Air Force Base on a cement crew. And I'll have to tell a few stories before we get started and get into the real stuff. But in those days, we were fans. I mean, we knew these guys personally, and we followed them wherever they'd go, to New England, to Canton. I can remember getting off work on the air base on construction, and my mother knew to have the food ready in Moira, 65 miles away at a certain time. My brother and I had a 39 Ford coupe, standard coupe. My first car, $45 in a junkyard, and souped that baby up and shaved the head 65,000s and put a 3/4 race cam in it and go down the road. And my brother would drive and I'd be hanging out the door, and we'd slow down to about 15 miles an hour, and my mother would rush out with two plates full of food, and I'd grab it through the window, slam the door, and head down the road 100 miles an hour and make it to the track in Canton and watch the races. Get home way late at night and then get up and go to work the next morning and do it all again. And it was great fun. And racing is still great fun. This track has gone through an awful lot of changes down through the years, as you know. I'm sure in the interview you'll see with Morris Broderick and the others later on today, people will learn that there have been trials and tribulations. And like a lot of other things, stock car racing has had its ups and downs over the years.
It has a lot of ups and downs, and I think one of the big ones was the transfer from asphalt to dirt to asphalt again. A lot of the drivers were building asphalt cars, and all of a sudden they decided, a new owner come in, they decided they wanted to make it dirt, and all of a sudden you didn't have any cars. So now the guys had to go out and buy new cars and buy new equipment, and that lasted 7, 8, 9 years, whatever it was, and all of a sudden somebody else came in and said, let's pave the track and make it asphalt again. Well, now you've got 25, 30 different dirt cars, and you have nothing to do with those cars. And if you want to race here, now you have to go buy new equipment to run the asphalt, because it's not, technology changed also. Back in the old days when these guys were running, you just changed tires, and now you can't do that.
Every now and again too. Shocks and tires, right?
But like I said, I think you'll find that in the beginning, Morris Broderick meant for this thing obviously to be a business, but also to be some fun family entertainment that was affordable, that you could take your family to and have a good time on a Saturday night. And to this day, that's the same thing that we're still trying to do today. We're still trying to make it so you can bring your wife and your couple kids, have a couple hot dogs, and enjoy yourself and have a nice evening out without spending a lot of money, and be home at a decent hour of the night. And you're not going to go home broke.
Is this track connected with any of the other area tracks anymore?
It's connected with Thunder Road, which is in Barrie, Vermont, and those two need each other.
Done that?
Those two need each other in a way to survive. Some of the cars obviously come from Vermont. Some of the fans come from Vermont, and I think you'll find later on, as Tom will probably tell you, about the percentages of what it used to be 10 years ago when he first took it over versus what it is now. So we can see a lot of growth in Airborne in the last 10 years, and hopefully it'll just keep right on going and keep growing, and it'll be here for the next generation.
I could tell enough stories about stock car racing and some of these guys in this room and about my family and the crazy things that happened to us before, during, and after the races to fill up this entire program. Two short things I'm going to tell, and then we're going to get on with the other interviews and get you off the hot seat, John.
That's why I can't figure why I'm sitting here, because these guys, we're going to be here till midnight tonight.
Never mind, it's okay with me. I love the history, and I think it's very important to tell the history of something like stock car racing in the North Country. It's very important. I remember photographs, actually 8mm movies, of the Gwinnett boys racing on the ice back in the 1940s and early 1950s that Charlie Gwinnett had before he died. And the Gwinnett family's always been involved in racing and building cars from way back when. And I would love to be able to get a hold of that 8mm film and show it sometime on this program. Like many other programs we do, this may have to be a two-part series before we're through, John.
We were talking about that a little bit, and next year we're planning to do something a little bit bigger, and we have the 50th anniversary coming up in a couple more years, and I think with a little help and a little experience on my part as far as organizing this, maybe we can do something a little bit bigger.
We'll whet your appetites. My good friend Ken Squire has been involved with stock car racing and Catamount since the very beginning, and look at the guy's made more money than all of us in this room put together in broadcasting and racing for the major television networks, and he's done a super job. And he was always a good promoter too on that side of the lake, right?
A little bit before my time. I didn't know a lot about Ken Squire's promoting. A nice individual. He now owns a part owner in Thunder Road, and I believe in Airborne now, I think. But nice individual, nice guy to talk to, about old times. But I don't know a lot about his promotional skills or anything like that, but I'm assuming he had a very, very
great
hectic
voice,
schedule trying to do radio and TV. Yep.
And he did it all for a long, long time, and was a figure that was synonymous with stock car racing in the North Country. Now my little stories, and then we move on. Our family always used to travel together. As many of our fans know out there watching this show, we had 13 kids, and we'd pile all of our kids that wanted to go to the races. Sometimes it would take 2 vehicles, and we'd be at a racetrack somewhere, and there'd be so many fans. You couldn't just get in your car and drive out. It was a mammoth thing just to get people going. The dust would be flying in the air, and one night at Catamount, we said, I'll tell you what happened. We're all going to get in the car and finish the popcorn, roll the windows down, and just close our eyes for a few minutes. And we open our eyes, and the place will be empty, and we'll get out, right? We'll catch the last ferry home. Well, about 3:30 in the morning, we all started to wake up. Everybody was gone, and poor old Pa had to make the long drive home all the way around.
The ferry wasn't running 24 hours a day back then, was it?
It wasn't. And I said a few choice words which will never be heard on this family show. And another time I remember many stories, but one of the great stories is my son Gordy, who's, how old is Kevin? Charlie, you can holler it out over there.
38.
Yeah, well, that's what my son Gordy is 38, and they were buddies. Charlie's son and my son Gordy were buddies back in those days. And when he was a little kid, before he was 4 or 5 years old, he knew every driver's name. He knew the number of every car, and he had this little red sweater that he always wore, not just to the races, but to school and the bathtub, the ball practice. And this little red sweater had a big 5 7/8 written on the side of it. And I was going to ask my wife today if she could find it, and I bet it's folded up in some drawer somewhere, and Charlie would laugh to see that. But my son Gordy, who lives out in Portland, Oregon, is still a race fan, still goes to races all over the country, and still remembers all those names and all those. And when I tell him on the phone, and you can bet I will after we finish tonight, that I was out here with these guys, he's going to go crazy. There was a lot of good times back in those days, and yeah, they had good hot dogs and good hamburgers and good sodas, and we had a lot of good times with racing. Not the smallest good times were involved with my tenure with the radio station. As you know, I was with a local station for almost 36 years, and we broadcast the races. What was that announcer? Red
O'Connor.
Red O'Connor. He was also involved in civil defense here in the city back in those days, helping people build bomb shelters in their cellars and backyards. But he made it exciting, didn't he? Huh? He made it truly exciting, and Charlie and I are going to talk about that. And I remember one one time, I said 2 stories, going to turn out to be a couple before we get going, but how do you stop a motor once you get it fueled up? One time we were there, and we had a young announcer in those days by the name of Ken Duquette, and he was helping us broadcast. And he had the old wiry mobile unit parked in the infield, and somebody had the bad sense to spin out right there. So that wasn't Charlie at that time, and broadside right into the wiry mobile unit, so I'm not sure the broadcast was very good that night.
Might have got interrupted a little bit.
And
right?
another story on Charlie I'll tell, and that's the last one about the radio business. I was broadcasting one night, and Charlie and I were very good friends, and the race hadn't been underway for a second and a half, and he spun out in turn 1 with his foot right through the floor. And he rolled that coupe of his right up against the wall in turn 1, and I hollered, "Holy!" And I was on the radio at the time, and dropped the microphone and went running right out on the track. It's a wonder I didn't get killed, but I was worried that Charlie was all right. There were a few dents in that poor old coupe, but Charlie was okay. He was, even though some people may say he was brain dead from that moment on. That's not true. He just grows old like the rest of us. John, thanks so much for getting us together tonight. You and I will chat at the end of this program, and we'll thank you for it. Now we're going to, in just a moment, get right into the meat and potatoes, okay?
I think you've got a lot coming up, and be prepared, because I'm just a little nervous about these two, but
never mind.
I think you got some good stories, and I think they'll bring back some memories from them and what they used to do, and hopefully it's enjoyable for them, and hopefully it's enjoyable for the viewers.
And you know it's going to be enjoyable for me, so get that short, cool one and a big bowl of popcorn, and stand by. We are going to have a wonderful time on our little corner. All right, we took a little break to relax and oil up our brains a little bit, and now we're at the table with some of the most important people I've ever met in my life. To my left, 5 7/8, and now I find out number 99, Charlie Trombley. How are you, Charles?
Not bad, not bad.
Great to see you. Boy, oh boy, 1954. I got to turn this around. I said I wasn't going to do it till later, but take a look at this, folks. You even find his wife's maiden name in there.
That's right. She's the one put this all together for me. Good thing she kept track of it.
What year were you guys married?
1957.
Oh, he was just impressing her back in those days. You got it? All right, and she's been around and been a loyal fan ever since, right?
That's it.
Except for a couple of times.
Yeah, a few times we know it, Gordy.
And Charlie and I have been friends for a long time, spent a few picnics on the beach out there at Point of Rush. And
many times out there with the LaPlants and the whole bunch. We had a lot of fun.
I see John every once in a while. He's still a fisherman, boy. He still loves to get out on the ice, doesn't he?
Yes, he does. He goes out fishing pretty all the time in the winter.
That's great. That's great. All right, Jean-Paul Cabana, how are you, my friend?
Very good.
Glad to have you down. Who you got over here next to you?
Oh, the guy who was my partner on racing for more than 25 years, Jean-Claude Fortin.
How are you?
Fine, and you?
Great to have you down here tonight. See, we get a little bit of the Canadian angle and the French side of things down here. You spent a lot of years racing. Did you start before Charlie or after?
No, I started in 1953. 53, 54, but I quit just 2 years ago. You know, I make more than 40 years in racing.
Isn't that amazing? I tried to get Charlie to come back, and he did come back a few thousand times, and then he decided, nah, I guess I'm going back to onion farming.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I came back driving for our in that late models there, and for about 3 years, and then I got back out of it because it's a lot of work, and if you want to do it right, you got to spend a lot of time at it and do it the proper way, and I guess I wasn't prepared to put that much time in it.
But you always said that. When you were racing, you said, I'm going to do it right or I'm not going to do it.
Well,
you were hard on yourself and hard on everybody who worked on your car.
A little bit, but I guess it's like anything else. You only get back out of it what you put in it. And if you want to be a good race driver or whatever, you got to really work hard at it. And that's what and it returns if you work hard enough at it.
So you started maybe a year after Jean-Paul?
I guess so. If I started in 1954, that was my first year. I didn't, because at first I think John Paul raced over in Canada, and I raced over here for a while, and I think we got racing later on, probably in the early 60s, when more or less before I really get to know John Paul. I used to race against him over in La Prairie when we were in there.
God, I forgot
We had
La
some
Prairie.
good times. Oh, yes, that was some good racing over there, too. Great times over in La Prairie.
How did you happen to discover Airborne?
But the reason that I race in Montreal, and that's a good story too. The reason that the guy in Riverside Speedway, he told me one day, he said, "Jean Paul, I like you. You come here, but I sure like you never come back. You win too much."
They do that to some people in Vegas too.
Yes, I don't know the word for that, but he gave me a good shot. And that's the reason I come in the United States.
Well, how did you guys get together? How did you ever meet this guy?
Oh, because I live in Napierville, which was right near La Prairie, where Jean-Paul was hanging around. There was a whole bunch of people, and we've been working together. And I think I started to follow Jean-Paul, I would say maybe mid-60s, until he retired, and we always been friends. I was the owner. I would say I was the owner for 15 or 20 years. He was running strong on the ACT Tour and the late model.
Boy, if we could go on for about 6 hours with all your racing experiences on both sides of the border, but you guys will all have to admit that Airborne was about as much fun as you could get racing.
Yeah, I think, especially Airborne, we have a lot of fun. I think I come in 1960, and I won the first championship in 1961, and that's the reason I run the Daytona in 1962. At that time,
A lot of people don't know that.
Yeah, you remember, at that time, if you win the championship with NASCAR, you have the chance to run the Daytona. And I go there in 1962. I never, in that time, and I don't talk very good English, I tell you. I don't know if everybody understand me, but I try. But at that time, I never say a word in French. And I was at Daytona. You can imagine all the
That had to
problems.
be fun. Were they racing on the beach then, or was that at Daytona Speedway?
Daytona Speedway, on the big track.
Because back in the old days, they used to have stock car races on the beach at Daytona, too.
Yeah, but I don't remember that. But I remember the first time I go to Daytona, I see the track on the beach. At that time, we see one curve, still there. But I never see the race on the. I was too young.
Oh, was that an experience at Daytona? Tell me, yeah, sure. Tell me what that was like racing on that big speedway in Daytona.
You can imagine. The reason, that's hard to explain, but that's so fast, that's very dangerous for us. If I run myself on 30, 35 mile an hour, that's no problem. I know if I run 130 or 135, but each mile past 135 represents on my head 5 miles. You imagine at that time I run 160, 68 mile an hour. And they stopped me, the officials stopped me. The reason I run on the pit so fast, I run more than 100 mile an hour, you imagine.
Oh, man, I wasn't there.
And I need practice for 2 days. Just make 2 laps on the track and stop. 2 laps on the track and stop. I'm missing about all the practice.
So what was the race like?
Very good. I finished 9 on that race, and I won. That was the first. I finished the first sportsman. If you remember, at that time we won with Modify and sportsman, and that was the first time in NASCAR the sportsman finished under 10. And
Really?
Yeah, and I won the race on my class. I finished 9, but I was the first sportsman. And at that time, I go upstairs after with Ken Squire, a good friend to me.
Oh, yeah, sure.
But he tried to ask me something, but I never understand a word, All the time I say yes.
You see, you weren't there when he needed you yet, were you?
That's right. But I started, I think the first time, first beginning, I used to hang around with Charlie because there was a bunch of friends from Hemingford in Saint Bernard de la Colle. And after that, in 1964, I went to Daytona. We were 4 together. At that time, we bought $300 to Jean-Paul so he could make the race because he had went a little bit earlier and he spent all his budget. So you imagine you come in a room where they sleep 8 people in 2 beds, and there were some heads and some intakes and some carburetors and can of beans. So we brought the money so he could make the race and race in Daytona at the time. It was in '64, my first time.
Long before I met Jean-Paul, I went to Daytona too. I was going to college on Long Island in 1959, and 4 of us said, well, let's go out for pizza. You did that about 1 o'clock in the morning. Back in those days, I could stay up past 9 o'clock at night. So we went out for pizza and said, well, we got this far, let's go to Florida. You know, Long Island, Florida. We had $18 in a Shell credit card and an old 53 Chevy convertible, and we headed for Florida. And in Georgia, we got stopped and went to one of those kangaroo courts because we were, you know, they got the signs of 50 miles an hour, then 35 miles an hour, about 5 feet down the road, and they brought us in, and the old judge said, how much you got with you, kid? And I said, $18. He said, the fine is $18.
That's about the way
And
it
guess
works.
what? We went to Florida anyway, and we stole some chickens and stole some grapefruits. And but the thing that broke my heart more than anything else, as we had enough money to buy 1 can of beans. I don't know how we survived, but we didn't have enough money to get in Daytona Speedway. We parked outside. In those days, they used to let people camp, and there was tents all the way up and down outside the Speedway. And I had to stay outside the Speedway and miss the race that year. And we were down there during Daytona. It broke my heart.
I can imagine that would be bad after going that far to see it.
Oh, Charlie, you know, I was listening to Jean-Paul driving at those amazing speeds down at Daytona, a little different from the half-mile tracks and the mile tracks up here in the North Country, but people have no idea what reflexes it takes to drive a stock car at those speeds on a small track, a dirt track or an asphalt track. As you look back on it now, can you imagine how you could get those cars to go around the track in those speeds and not get killed every day of the week?
I know, that's it. I guess most people, they don't really realize what it is, what a stock car driver has to go through. My kid just went down to Darlington this year, and because you know you can get in those where you can drive, pay so much to drive. And he went out there about 135, 40 miles an hour, and he come back and he said, well, Dad, I kind of respect the drivers a little bit more than I realized, because he said, I'm going 135 miles an hour, and he said, I cannot believe how much pressure and everything's in those cars against G's, against pushing you and all that. He found out it's not as easy as most people think it is.
What was the first track you ever raced at?
Airborne.
Was it really?
Yes, it was. And I tipped the car over the first race.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. I think I might have a picture here. Yep, I do.
There it is.
It's a little bit fuzzy, folks, but I want
of the car.
the bottom right there, the bottom of the car. And we got it right here in black and white because we didn't have color photographs back in those days. But yeah, bottom right here where I'm pointing at it right here.
That was my first race.
I thought that was a tractor trailer accident. Charlie said, no, that's me under there somewhere.
That's it.
Did you get one lap in before you rolled?
Well, I guess we got going, but I was trying to get by a guy, and we did not have much for brakes, and he slowed down, and I run right over the top of him.
Well, a lot of these old coupes that they were running back in those days when they were first built, they had mechanical brakes. I bet you John doesn't even know what that word means. We had to run with cables or rods back in those days for brakes.
Exactly, and it wasn't too good. We couldn't stop too good. And I hit one of them little coops in the back and just flipped me right over.
Did you ever think, why in the heck did I get into that business in the first place?
Well, when you're on your top, sometimes you wonder, but I think it's still a great sport. I have enjoyed it through the years, and I think it was great for me. I met a lot of great people, and I'm very happy that I did compete in racing and stuff, and I think it was one of the greatest sports I ever got into.
Did you ever figure out how many races you entered and how many you won?
No, I would have no idea how many.
Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of races.
Quite a few
Some
races.
you'd like to forget.
A lot of them. Some, but you always remember the good ones.
Yeah. Well, you know, this competitor, we were joking along about how these guys might get in a fist fight behind the table as they recalled old memories. These guys were competitors. It's like good ball players or anything else. You didn't want to lose. You didn't go out there to lose, did you?
No, all the time you go there for win, you know. And I'm very lucky. I won a lot of race myself, you know. And I win the same of Charlie said before. I win the first race, and I drive in 1953. In the first race I win the race. I don't remember how many cars finished the race. It's possible just 2 or 3, but I win. You imagine, you know, I finished with the checker flag. And at that time, my father don't know I'm in the racing business.
Oh, he didn't know that?
Now, you know that, you see myself the first time at Drummondville on the dirt, and the night I win, you know, we stop in the front of the grandstand, we pull out, we open the door at that time, you know. We open the door, we go out, you know, and I wave, you know. He said, "Hey, that's my son."
That's my kid.
You imagine the time I come at my home the same night? Oh, he tell me something in French.
Did he really?
Yes. and I understand something.
Well, did he become a big fan of yours? through the
After,
years?
yeah. After he come with me about every race I run in the province of Quebec. And United States, you know, you don't come, but in the province of Quebec, especially at that time, I run at Drummondville, I run sometime at Granby, but we run the Sunday afternoon somewhere, like Victoriaville and like that, and he follow me. He come with my private car all the time.
So how many races would you run in the course of a week back in, let's say, in the 60s once you started coming over here? How many times a week would you run? Twice? 3 times?
Yeah, we run about 2 or 3 at that in 1960. But what I run most, you know, that's the time we run with ECT. Before ECT, we run with NASCAR. I run 5 times a week. I run 1 time in province of Quebec, and I run 4 times in United States. And I live I have the motel in very close to Cabana, and I stay there. That's the reason, you know. Sometime I come back in my home, and my son tells me, "Uncle." That's the joke, but I never be at my home, you know.
There were a lot of times they called them not NASCAR widows, but stock car widows. If the women didn't like stock car racing, you didn't get to see them all the time back in those days.
That's right. So my wife was actually used to the racing a little bit before because we weren't married at first. So she actually had a little bit of taste of it before I was into racing. But I was like John Paul. Racing takes you all over the country, and you spend a lot of time. I've seen me race 5 times a week, but normally speaking, through my career, I probably race 2 to 3 times a week because 5 times a week is one hard and still keep a job. That is very, very hard.
Yeah, you had to have a way to make a living. I mean, the purses weren't that big most of the time.
No, we were probably about 20 years too early as far as racing. If we could have been racing today, the way we raced then, we would have probably had much more opportunities to get somewhere. But back in those days, it was tough to get anywhere because you had to foot the bill, design everything yourself, and it was not like today. Today, if you got money, you can buy anything. But back those days, you could not buy it.
Well, and you know, like you said, you didn't have unlimited resources. You didn't have sponsors willing to give you $10,000, $15,000 a week, and it was tough to get the car going. I mean, most of the times you only had 1 or 2 cars, right?
That's right. We used to get $50. We really appreciate it. The biggest I ever got from anybody was $1,000. That was from G&G when we run the Firestone Special, and man, that was a lot of money as far as we were concerned, you know. But Paul, my mechanic, was very good. We could probably build as good a car as just about anybody for the least amount of money to a lot of people. So I was very fortunate with Paul. He was a very good mechanic and did not spend a lot of money, and still we were competitive pretty near all the races we ever went to.
What was Paul's last name?
Paul Conover, one of the greatest persons I ever knew. And Joe Martin was another one that was with me for years. 2 great, great persons.
And they could tell by the sound of that engine when it was ready to go.
Yes, Paul had a very good year. He was very, very good. To believe it or not, when he first started with me, the man was not even a mechanic, but he was one of those people that no matter what he did, it came easy to him, and he was very good at it.
Now, you have to tell the people that back in those days, those people who were watching NASCAR races on television these days and see these highly trained and highly paid pit crews, the wonderful tools that they have to work in the shops they have to take an engine out in an hour and 10 minutes. It was a little different in those days in the infield.
Yeah.
To get on there, you try to put a starter on in the infield with all that sound and try to find that wrench when you needed it, and
a
But-
flashlight
Yeah.
too.
You know, especially at that time, that was very hard. And I tell you something, that was harder for the guy from the province of Quebec. The reason is easy, you know, about 75% of the parts, you come from the United States.
Yeah.
And when you buy, you need to pay the custom. I tell thank you to the customer, they give me so many chance, you know. If I pay all the duty, I never come back racing. Thank you, custom.
Unless, Paul, I'd sneak him over for you.
I wonder if it's too late for them to come and get you.
Right. We better not say too
Well,
much.
you know, we didn't break the laws too much back in those days, but boy, a lot of them got almost bent right in half before we got through. Charlie you lived right up in the Moores area. You always have. You were
Yes.
born and brought up there, right?
Exactly. I spent my whole life right up there in Moores.
And how many different cars did you drive in your career? Do you know? Do you remember?
Oh, my
Did
God.
you start with a coupe?
I started with this
99 with a coupe?
That little coupe, yes. That was my first one with Mo Super. Now I had built that little 99 right there. As far as how many cars, oh my God, I used to be a very good body man. They'd fix it up beautiful, and I'd fix it in the wall.
He was a good. We can take a look at that.
You
First.
did a few of them, Paul.
I don't know if you can see the number
doubt
99 right on this picture here, but Calvin could get pretty close to it. What kind of a car was that?
That was a little 32 Ford coupe. We used to cut down and make a little flathead Fords. Believe it or not, they were flathead Fords, and that's what we were running at that time.
People don't, I'm sure, have you got a picture of it there, Calvin? That's a decent one. People don't know what flathead means. We got to explain a little bit about those flatheads. I had a whole bunch of them in my cellar for a long time till I sold them all. But what was a flathead? What does that mean?
Well, the engines of today, they're overhead cams and all that. And a flathead, it was no cams. It was just a plain little flathead, and the valves would come up. And I guess it would be different to a lot of people from what we used to see. I'm sure you drove the flatheads too, ain't Paul?
Those flathead V8s.
For so many years.
Those flathead V8s didn't start out with a heck of a lot of horsepower.
Yeah, but we run at that time with that flathead. Sometime we run with two or three carburetor. We run with methanol too,
Methanol, 3 carburetors.
Surprisingly, we could make them little flatheads run pretty strong. Yeah. Till the Chevrolets came out, then it kind of took it over. When the V8 Chevrolets in 1955, 56, that's when the flatheads had to kind of take a back seat then, because the Chevrolets were just too strong.
Did you run Chevys yourself?
Yes, I ran Chevrolets most of the time, and I got into Fords only about 2 or 3 years. Well, although the flatheads were Fords, but after I started running the V8s, we ran Chevrolets because it was so much easier to run a Chevrolet, get all the parts, cheaper. It was just a better, easier car to run at the time. It was very few could run a Ford and Ford to run a Ford to keep competitive with the Chevrolets. They were not, you could not do it. Chevrolet, you could blueprint the engines and get a real good race engine with very little work, where you could not do that with the Ford engine.
And you never cheated, right?
They never catch me.
That's exactly. I never was caught. So I never cheated.
Well, there were always rules and regulations that had to be followed, right?
Well, I'll tell you what. Most of the good runners were not the ones that did the cheating. There was more cheating on the cars that ran from 5th, 10th place than it was the good runner, because the good runners could make their cars run. They had the right mechanics, the right drivers and stuff, and the good runners did not have to cheat. It was most generally, all the cheating was way in back of the field, because they couldn't make the cars run up with the good guys. And that was, and I think Paul would agree on that.
Yeah.
For sure, if you, I made a joke before, he said they never find me, but that's what Charlie said. If you try to cheat, all the time, first thing, if you run 4 or 5 times a week, the guy he check your motor about
All
every
the
time. And if he catch you one time, they watch all the time after. That's not good fun for us. Another thing, we don't have the time for rebuild the motor or replace the parts they pull out. The reason we race the day after, that's very important.
You didn't have all the beautiful vans to tow your cars around with back in those days?
No. I guess when I first started, I actually dragged the car with just a front with a
tow bar.
With a tow bar, but then we finally got real. I don't know what you'd call it. Anyway, we ended up with a little trailer, which we carried our car. It was great. At least we had something. If we smashed it up, we could get it home.
It was so beautiful. The body work, shine them all up. Your 5 7/8 was, as I recall, black and maroon.
Exactly. And
How would I remember that?
Yeah, I wonder, ain't Gordy? I'm sure you knew every kink in it.
Yeah, but they looked so good when you first, you'd been working on them all week and shining them all up and got out on the track.
The little coupes were actually pretty out there. I thought they were beautiful little cars out there racing.
Loved them. Yeah, I loved them. You spent a lot of time on them, and sometimes somebody get you coming out of turn one, and that would be the end of the beauty, right?
Yes, but you know, Charlie, you said we talked something about a tow bar. In 1963, I bring the car from Montreal to Daytona with the tow bar. I passed the tunnel.
Really?
Yes, sir. I passed the tunnel, and the car was so dirt. You know, we need wash at the racetrack. Everybody look us. You know, he said, "Where they come this guy?" You can imagine. But the years after, that's the first time I have a trailer that Charlie gave me. He gave me his trailer for make the trip at Daytona. I remember that.
Yep. Yeah, I guess
Isn't that
I
amazing?
I gave
Isn't-
Paul used my trailer the first year he went to there. But he says tow bar. I was in Montreal one time, and I happened to look out the side window, and I look, and here's my stock car going by me. It broke loose. It broke loose back of the truck, and
Oh, what a race.
It went off the road and into the ditch.
Oh, that didn't make you very happy?
Well, it didn't hurt it. We just had to get the thing back in back behind the car and towed it in. But that was one of the things of racing. But
the car, not the driver.
I bet you there were a lot of stories, not only on the track, but off the track.
You can imagine. That's another story, you know. Before that meeting, we talked together, Charlie and myself. So we never had too much argument himself. We have some argument. That's normal. We race very hard together. But what I had the luck for myself, you know, the reason. If he was mad, he talked very fast, and I don't understand nothing. And after I asked somebody, what shall he tell me?
And I told him he was a great driver and a good guy.
I don't think so.
He walked away. We're happy.
Well, you know, before we started, you mentioned Red O'Connell. You know, the track announcer had a lot to do with the excitement at the racetrack, didn't they?
Red O'Connor probably was one of the greatest announcers there was. He could make any. In fact, I could get excited listening to the racing radio after.
Yeah.
He was such a good announcer. And Ken Squires was a great announcer too. We were very lucky up here. We had two great announcers and made the racing very. Because I can remember people saying they would sit on the radio if they couldn't get the race and sit there glued to the radio just listening to them races. And you probably had to listen to them yourself in the car and stuff.
Lots of times, and it was so exciting. And the scorekeepers, how many of those can you remember from Airborne, from the old days?
Well, I can remember a few of them. There was a lot of them through the years, but it was great just to remember all these people. That's why I brought some of these scrapbooks out, because you know, through the years I could just kind of put this all away and you forget all this.
I was thinking, as I was driving up here, you know, you get all these flashbacks, and I remember a good friend of mine, Art Prairie, who used to be out there. He was a ham radio operator, and we did another show about ham radio operators, and we talked about him, but he was great. He was I don't think he ever drove. He drove the pace car every now and again. He was a flagman, right?
Yes, he was. And he was very colorful. He was a lot of fun. I think Paul remember him. You remember Art Prairie?
Art
when he
Prairie
was
back in the old days?
Not too much.
But the flagman, he could add a lot to the race too, right?
So, flyman, you know, sometime I have the bad story about that, you know, but the reason I hit the flyman myself at Drummondville.
Come on.
Yeah.
Really?
The guy died.
How did that
Yeah,
happen?
in 1956, you know,
Oh, goodness.
that was the first time for the TV was there with Radio Canada.
Oh, man, oh,
And
man, oh, man.
We asked the promoter, you know, for 2-3 weeks before, you need to change this guy. Someday you have a very bad accident. He wasn't on the track. Completely on the track. He was supposed to be about 25 to 30 feet, you know, on the left side of the car. And especially that night, you know, the time I see him, we have some dust. I see him, he was on my right. You imagine I was in second groove. I try everything, you know, but I can't save the guy, and that's a very bad story for myself.
You must have nightmares about that even now, do you think about it, huh?
Charlie, remember that's with what's the name of the flyman? Paul Demers. Paul Demers was supposed. We made the deal at that night. Paul Demers was supposed to make the job of flyman, and another guy he said for the first time the TV is here. What reason I don't fly? But then, and the promoter let them fly, you know. But that's a very bad story, you know.
Oh, well, you know,
We was with NASCAR. We was very lucky at that time.
Yeah.
With NASCAR, we never had problem, you know. But if we had problem, you imagine my father was very, very bad.
Well, there's sad stories as well as
Yes, there
happy
is.
ones.
We had one time over in La Prairie, one of the flagmen got hit too. I don't think he died, but he got hurt too. Because at one time they would stand on the track, and naturally, guys like Paul and I and stuff would come from the rear. When that flag dropped, we went to racing, and the cars, like he said, maybe it got jammed up and the guy didn't get off the track. But nowadays, flagmen do not stand on the track no more, and it's a great thing.
It was
because
exciting to watch in those days, and there were relatively few accidents. Now that you think back on it, that guy had to be skillful, because there were. I mean, you know, there are a lot of times cars would tangle up before they ever got to the starting line.
Sure, people miss a gear. You know, a lot of them say, well, this guy jammed him in the rear or something like that, which was not so, because the guy might have missed a gear or something like that. And when you're bumper to bumper with a bunch of cars taking off, things can happen very quick, and you're only 4 feet away, and you cannot do a thing
You
about
don't
it.
have time to react. I remember in the old days, Billy Gwinnett used to race once in a while, and he was crazy. I mean, he put it to the floor, and whatever happened, his car ended up right on top of another car one time. He was going a little faster than the guy.
Exactly. We've been in that position ourselves. I've been on top of cars myself. Over in Catamount one time, I ended up 2 cars high.
Well, that was a different kind of racetrack entirely at Catamount, and so was Thunder Road. Every track's different. Thunder Road, you could damage a car real easy on those walls over there.
Excuse me, but I don't say that, I don't tell too much that. You know, the reason Thunder Road is a very short track.
Very short track. That's the
You make
reason,
a
yeah.
lot of accident, but not a very, very big damage. The big damage I had at Thunder Road, that somebody pushed me on the backstretch, and I go hit the wall, you know, completely on the curve number 3
Yeah.
in the parking lot. By the back, you know, the car was about scrapped completely. But that's about just that bad accident I had at Thunder Road, that I raced for so many years there.
Is that because the
Lot of
speeds were
accident.
slower?
That's the reason. A lot of accident, but not very big damage compared to Plattsburgh. Plattsburgh, you imagine the speed we go there, you know. That's completely different.
I've seen a lot of broken hearts
Yeah.
with a lot of money spent on cars. You work all week, hours and hours and hours, and never make one lap.
Exactly. Plattsburgh's, like Paul says, Plattsburgh was a very, when the old track, that was a big track. And when we'd come down that straightaway, we were, especially when we had the big modifieds, we were moving, because I don't know exactly what our speeds were, but I mean, you cannot compare Plattsburgh with a lot of these tracks, because when you did hit with Plattsburgh, you hit very hard. It would tear the front. I've seen me one time when I was leading one of the big races, and the steering let go. I hit the wall, took the front tire right to the rear. It just took the whole front of the car right off. You probably was there that time when I was leading that race. And
You know I was.
so Plattsburgh did. It was a good track. I loved Plattsburgh because it brought out a lot of hard charging of the drivers, but it was a tough track. When you did smash up, you smashed hard.
The lighting wasn't too good in the backstretch sometimes either, right?
No, it wasn't. You had to know the track. I know the outer counters would come in and they couldn't understand how we'd go through.
How could you see it going past those woods down there,
Yeah,
right?
another thing you need on the backstretch at Airborne, you know, you need to watch who is on your left side.
Oh, yeah, you got that
If the
right.
guy push you a little, you know, you are in you are out of the track. That's so fast.
Yeah.
Another thing, you know, now on 19 on this year, you need weight something. The car weight about 3,000 pounds, and you need weight that. You know, you put some lead, you know, in the car. But the time we talked, Charlie and myself, we don't have the rule for the weight. If you build your car the most.
About 2,300 pounds.
23.
Yeah.
People don't
About
know.
2,400 pounds we could build them.
By today's standards, they have no idea. Those little coupes didn't weigh very much when you started.
And then not only that, back in our days, when we were way back, we had probably stronger engines those days than they do today, because we had no limit. I ran 454 Chevys with fuel injection and alcohol. I'll tell you, when you'd step
Think
on
about-
that, you took off.
Think about that, fans. You want to try to handle a coupe with a 454 Chevy in it?
Yeah, all we do is aim them sometimes. Then we hit somebody. It wasn't our fault because we were just aiming the thing, you know.
You know, that's what I said
come-
before. Yeah.
Yeah, I come with the Chrysler too. You know, I think I come for half of season with the very big Chrysler, 426. You know,
I remember.
You can imagine the power they had on that car.
Oh.
That was very dangerous. And I go to Martinsville too with the motor about like that, 454. That's the last time I run with the modified. I said, never I drive another modified. That's so dangerous.
Well, you know what I said before about reaction time? Thank goodness when you guys were young, when you were driving the really hot stuff, and your reaction was way quicker. You had to have reflexes. You almost had to guess what was going to happen.
That you need see and you need know before what coming. You know, especially with that motor, we have the very wide tire at that time too.
Oh, yeah.
If you pass somebody, you know, you need to watch all the time. The tire was about, what, 10-inch the side of the fender, and sometimes that's about 15-inch. You know the rule? I remember Charlie come with the very wide tire.
Sharp bumper. We had a few sharp bumpers once in a while. But it was, those cars right there were very hard to drive. People don't realize the modifieds back then was, they were, you take like a 427 Ford on alcohol. When you drive that, it was very, very quick. When I started driving for Ferrari with that late model, you know, well, my God, I had a ball with that because it drove so easy to compare what I did. And that's why I won so many races when I was with Bob. Bob and I could have probably won everything if Bob would have really wanted to work hard at it. But we did very good, and we never even had to look at the car. But it made it so much easier to drive a late model, which Paul left us NASCAR guys and went driving late models, which I think today probably was the greatest thing, because the late models went on further than the modifieds, because the modifieds got too strong, too much money, and everything else, and people had to start falling back out of it. Where when the late models, he went over to Catamount, and I made the decision to stay Plattsburgh and Riverside. Yes, we stayed with, and Paul, you, when I think, I don't remember what year it was, but you went over to Catamount. You were one of the first year, didn't you?
Yeah.
The Dragons and all that. So a lot of those guys left Airborne and they started driving Catamount, which at the time we were stronger with the modified, but they outlasted us. And the late models carried on where the modifieds kind of dwindled down.
I don't think a lot of people know the difference between a sportsman, late model, modified. Explain the differences.
That's completely different. First thing, we don't know enough mechanic at that time. If we put too much power on the motor for the suspension, first thing. I remember
every time.
Yeah, I had the guy, he worked for me for 21 years, Claude Favreau, and he said if we try the car in the left front wheel, lift the ground for about 2-3 inches. I said, hey, tonight we run good. What reason? We have 4 tires and we run on 3. That's not safe. But we don't know more.
Yeah.
That we run with the straight axle first thing, and now with the new LMS, you know, or new model, the tire on left side use about 50% of the tire on the right side. Completely different.
Yeah.
Yes, we would run around. I would run like I can remember my modified, it carried the left front wheel. That's when, I remember when Buck Holliday lost his left front wheel in that big race, and he said they finished third, which was really no big thing. A lot of people think it was great, but we never had it on the ground anyway, so it didn't make much difference when it got knocked off, because as long as he still had his brakes, he could still go.
Are you having as much fun as we are? This is one of the greatest times I've had ever doing this program in all my years of broadcasting. Go ahead, get yourself another cool one while we take a sip and take a deep breath, and we'll be back with our little corner in the history of Airborne.
With the flat tires.
I'll tell you, we shut the camera off and told 7 great stories before the camera got going again, but I won't forget. We're going to talk about that race with Buck Holliday, because I was there.
Yes, that was a great race that day. It was a 100-lapper, I believe. It was Buck Holliday leading it. I was Billy Wimble, myself, and Kateri, I think it was. And we were door to door, and then we finally, Buck would have probably beat me that night. I think he had me beat because I could have never got away from Wimble and them. But he lost his left front wheel, which slowed him down approximately a little bit anyway. And I went on to win the race, and I think Wimble finished, I'm not sure if he finished second or what, but But it was a great race just to be in that time. In fact, we have the pictures of that race somewhere here too. But
On
it was
three
great.
wheels.
On 3 wheels, he went on.
Touching down in the curves and little sparks fly. Here we go again, get it off the ground and finish the race.
Yes,
Boy, you don't think the fans got worked up that night?
I know that was a great show for the fans because it's something that it looks real colorful to see a guy on 3 wheels going around there 100 and some miles an hour.
It's amazing. Now, before we go any farther, I want to tell another couple of stories. These guys were fierce competitors, but if somebody needed something and didn't have a wrench and you had a wrench, you'd share it. Not only that, sometimes you'd share a car. You had one good story you wanted to tell about that.
Yeah, especially at the Airborne, we have a lot of story, but one is very good. That's I remember one night, Beaver Dragon, he broke his car in the qualification race or like that, and he was first on the points, and myself, if I remember good, I was third, and I'm sure if Beaver don't race that night, I win the championship. I talked with my mechanic, Claude Favre, said, what we make with that, Beaver don't have a car. And I give my car to Beaver Dragon, and he win the championship. But he tell me, about 2 years, he said, Jean-Paul, I remember that for the rest of my life. But that was the racing at that time.
It made you feel good, it made him feel good, and it made you a hero in the eyes of the fans. You did the same thing one time.
Yes, with Rainy Charland. He blew an engine Airborne that night, and we had the big championship race over to Cabana. So I said, Rainy, I got another engine. I'll let you take my engine. So we worked all day that Saturday and put the engine in, and we headed for Cabana. I was leading the race. I blew my engine. Rainy went on to win the race with my engine.
With your engine. That's unbelievable. Now let's talk about the length of these races. Let's say at Airborne back in the early 60s, how long was a heat race?
Oh, that's a good question. I think that's about 8 laps or 10 laps or like that.
8 or 10, Charlie?
If some of them were shorter, 8 to 15 laps, the heat races were most generally. Then we moved up to features probably to 35 laps most generally.
Yeah, anywhere from 20 to 35 laps for the features.
That's possible, but I don't remember too much, I don't have enough good memory for that.
Well, the guys who were running the tracks in those days wanted to give the fan their money's worth. And believe me, when you went racing, you didn't go there and come home a half an hour later. Especially if you had a little rain in between, you might be driving home at 12:30 in the morning.
Exactly, because when the cars, if the track was a little slippery and stuff, it was could be quite a few slip outs and everything like that. But no, we had a lot of cars. Airborne I still think Airborne had some of the best racing in the country in certain years. And I can still talk to a lot of people, and they still will say that was probably some of the best racing I ever seen was when Airborne was really going at his tops.
Back in the old days, we used to have a thing called match races every now and again. Would you like to talk a little bit about that, Charles?
Well, yes, I guess one time I was running, I had a very good year going that year, and it was too many could beat me. So they put a $500 bonus on my head for Buck Holliday or anybody else that could beat me at the time, which made it very good for the people, spectators, and stuff like that. But it was a lot of fun. But I don't remember who did. I had to be running for them to beat me, because if something happened to my car, it did not count. But Morse Project put that $500 just to promote. Morse was a pretty shrewd boy.
What would a match race be? How many cars would there be on the track?
Well, at that time, we raced, one time Buck and I did race, just 2 of us, but basically I think the $500 bonus was during the race. That was a regular race at that time, because at the time I was running, like I say, very strong, and if anybody could beat me from there, they would get the extra $500. But Buck and I did have just a door-to-door race. That was always good too.
That was always fun. Now, we wish that we've lost a few drivers. Not necessarily because they got hurt or killed in the races, but they've just died on us because you guys are in your, how old are you, Charlie?
They must have been lots older than me, because I'm still young.
Yeah, you're young. Let's tell people
I'm still 39 years old.
Yeah,
What about you, John Paul?
For the last 30 years.
38 for me.
That makes me about 26. And I'm proud not to call these guys liars anytime. But Dick Nephew, for example, he can't be with us because he died a few years on us, but what a competitor he was, right?
Dick was a very good driver. He drove for years with us. I guess Dick was right with us from the first days on right up through with John Paul and I and Andre Manning. We had a lot of good drivers. Bob Bruno, Buck Holliday, like we were mentioned, and then Marcel Godard. All these guys from Canada was actually, I think there's a lot of those drivers could have drove anywhere. They've been very competitive, anybody, if they'd had the right equipment.
And we got quite a few Vermont drivers over here later on in the 60s, as well as a few from Canada.
Yeah, for sure, but I don't remember who raced with us, from Cabana at that time, but Beaver, I think, was there, but or Bobby. I think Bobby was, no, that's Beaver, he started
Beaver
before.
Dragon started before Bobby did.
They drove over here. They weren't that competitive over here in the modifieds and stuff against us because they used to run the Devil Bowls against them and stuff like that, but they got much more competitive when John Paul and all them went to late models. That's when Beaver and them really started getting good. Up to that point, they were not the competition. In other words, when I walked in the track, I didn't look to see if Beaver was there or somebody else. It was a lot of guys from Connecticut. My competition always was out of Connecticut, Canada, and Fonda. That was the strong.
Fonda, we didn't even talk about Fonda yet. Let's talk about Fonda.
Well, you had some great drivers over there. Ken Shoemaker and all those guys would come down. Pete Corey. And if you want to go way back, you go back to Steve Danish and all that. Now we're getting back there a long ways, but that those guys. Well, at that time, they were a little ahead of us in racing. And it took us a while to catch up to them. And back at the time, it was Bob Bushy out of Vermont was even. It was a few Vermonters. John Paul probably wasn't there, but I was there. They were a little bit ahead of us because we were just getting started and they had been racing previous years. And but we've had some great drivers that come from different parts of the country that drove, like Richie Evans drove Plattsburgh.
Yeah.
And Richie Evans, there was no greater. Pete Hamilton, Mick Tavish, Jerry Cook, all those guys.
You're getting some of the good names.
And I've run against Ned Jarrett, Earnhardt's father, and all these guys, Syracuse Fair and different tracks. So we've been against some of the better ones.
And a lot of these guys would only come here when there was a little bit of money in the purse and we had some pretty big races. So you'd only see them once or twice a season over here.
Yeah, for sure, but one thing I should like, they make, especially at Airborne, if you make a special race, with the whole driver, like Charlie, myself, and there's so many guys, from Canada too,
Yeah.
If you make a race next year or the years after, not the next 5 years, we will be too old. But if you make the race, for the driver like us, that will be very good fun.
Yeah,
I don't know, John Paul,
handed
who would hand us a car to run? The last car I ran, believe it or not, I never had sat one, or I never was on the track. It was over in Massachusetts because it was a bunch of us. Rainey Charlene kind of put a deal together where kind of like a Hall of Fame in Agawam, Mass. Yeah. And I went there, and they got me into, what do you call them, little ones? A little Legend car. I had never been in a Legend. I'd never been on the track. Well, I was.
You're tiny. You fit in that baby.
Well, I'll tell you, it was comical. But that little car surprised me. It went around that little track quicker than I ever thought I would get around. And I ended up third in the race with that little car, and it really surprised me. Because we had like Pete Hamilton was there, which I got to meet Pete again, Dutch Hogue, and all these guys like that. Well, a lot of great drivers was that thing.
We have a lot of mini legend in Montreal. We have about 20 cars, from with the mini legend, and that's very, very fast. They are especially I was at the Lake St. John last weekend, and mini legend was for one race they was faster than the LMS. Wow. You can imagine. The motor rev about 12,000 RPM.
Come on.
Yes, and they run
Whoa.
13,000. I was turning that little one in Agawam.
Well, folks, do you have a tachometer in your family sedan? Did you ever see it turn 12 grand or 13 grand? Yeah. If you did, I imagine there was sparks flying all the way across the highway.
Yeah, they sound just like it wouldn't even sound like an engine. It was just like a bee buzzing in it.
Just a real high-pitched whine.
The car weighed just 1,200 pounds.
Yeah.
And the 1,200 pound with that kind of car, with the small order for a 4-cylinder, now with the 3,000 pound, with the LMS, that's completely different. And that's the reason they are so fast. You can imagine they give a very, very good show.
It was always a great show. Even on a slow night, it was a straight good show. Back in those days, Charlie, did they have street model races back in the early days? Did they just have street cars come in?
Yes, it did. They used to come in, they bring in fact, up the riverside, all the tracks always came in with nothing. Airborne had plain stock cars. You would go out there, and some of the guys would want to see if they like racing stuff and get out there. I can remember a couple of guys, they got out there. They were so nervous they couldn't even buckle their helmet on. You had to buckle it up for them, but they were just like this. But it was comical, you know. But that's where you had to start, and sometimes some of them went on, and others did not like it too much.
We're talking a car right off the street, no special suspension, no special gas tanks back in those days.
No, sir. It was just not even braced.
No roll bars, no bracing. If you rolled it, good luck for you.
Yes,
You were lucky
especially
if you had a seatbelt on in some of those cars.
especially 1 year, I build a race car. I build all my race car before, and we make a race car with the roll cage was on the piece of metal, 4x4, not 4x4, 1 inch by 1 inch, square. You can imagine if I have the accident with that car, somebody kill me for sure. But we make 1 year, before we realize we have a very, very bad car. And I don't remember for what reason, but we have some accident and the road cage pry completely, was bent completely. That's the reason we changed. I built another car. We cut this one, That's too much dangerous. But we don't have the rule. That's the reason.
You didn't have rules back in those days, but we got to tell people what we're talking about. When you say a roll cage or a roll bar, that's supposed to save your life if you roll the car over or get it wrecked. That's why in some of these big NASCAR races, you see these cars and there's nothing left but the cage, and the guy gets out and waves to the crowd, and that's because of that cage.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's just like what Paul said. I remember building stock cars with my roll cage, and I use a tailpipe. Now, that's not too strong, and I use that because there was a real light pipe because we were going for the light cars. So all we had was tailpipes in there, but we finally started getting better pipes, and NASCAR came out, and we could not use that light stuff. But the way cars are braced up today, the NASCAR cars and stuff, nothing like what we had because we kept them to a minimum, and which was like Paul said. And not only that, a lot of the guys didn't even know how to weld as good, and the piping was not even welded good in it. So that was we had some dangerous cars back those days, but everybody had to start somewhere, and that's where we started.
You're lucky to survive. Did you ever have any good friends who were drivers who were killed on the track?
Not too much. Not too much. I'm very lucky. I raced for 40 years, and I'm very lucky. I never lost a friend on the race car.
That's amazing. With this kind of stock car racing at those speeds, with the kind of equipment we've described on this program, it's a miracle that people didn't get hurt bad.
Yes, believe it or not, racing. I never lost anybody racing, but I lost somebody of my mechanics going home from working on my car. That night I did not feel good. I went to bed and they worked on my car for a while. Then went home and they got racing, and 2 of the boys got killed, which goes to show you they get killed just going home from working, and none of us ever got killed racing, but yet you could get hurt on a highway. So it goes to show you, you do have to use your head even on a highway because that's where you get hurt worse than a stock car sometimes.
Well, racing, stock car racing has an amazing effect on you. I mean, I can speak for myself because you can tell I'm getting excited just sitting here talking about it. I'd be in the stands, and every fan just imagines himself out there behind the wheel of the car. We could no more do that than we could pitch in a professional baseball game, but we imagined we could. And some people who were almost over the edge in the first place would get in their cars, and unfortunately they would race out of the parking lot and down the road and home, and not more than one person got in an accident away from stock car races. It always made me drive a little bit slower on the way home, but some people did it the opposite way. But stock car racing has a tremendous, powerful effect on people.
Yes, it does. Everybody, they all want to be an Earnhardt or whatever, and we all, everybody likes to be like that. And a lot of people ask me, what is it like driving a stock car? Well, I said, I don't know. I can't really explain it to you without you being in the car or something. But I can tell you the closest thing I can ever tell you. You get your car that you drive every day. You drive down a nothing but a glare ice road at 85 miles an hour, and you just can feather this car. That's the closest thing I can tell you what a stock car feels like. Because we have to drive at that time with the modifieds, had to be drove right on a very ragged edge. It was just a matter of a little bit more you were going over or not. If you don't put it at that position, you were not a winner.
Well, of course, you had to go the maximum speed on the straightaways and as fast as you can make it through the curves. That was the idea.
And especially for myself, I built my race car for so many years. And the kick for me, to win the race, I prove what I make, what kind of parts I put on my car, that was a very good one. And the adjustment I make on my car, that's the speed is good, but okay, that's okay. When the race, you take the checker fly and everything. But if you build your race car and you win with your car, that's another thing. That's the reason I stay for 40 years and racing myself.
What year did you start putting double shocks on the outside of your car?
Well, I started racing in 1954, and I think about the next year, because when we ran at Airborne, let's face it, it was not the smoothest track in the world. If you remember, Gordy, you could see right slick and clean under me sometimes. So we finally, because I'd hit some of them corners go 4 feet in the air but before I'd land again. But we had to start shocking the car up, because sometimes I thought the whole bottom of the car was coming right up into my seat, But we started running 2 and 3 shocks there, especially when we were back on the days when we ran in the dirt, because we'd go through holes that was sometimes a foot deep. From the grandstand, it always looks beautiful out there, smooth, but I'll tell you, from the inside the car, it wasn't quite that smooth sometimes. I've had stones come and take the windshield and the mirror right out of the car, fly through.
Yeah.
Do you think it's allowed to shock on the race car at that time, Charlie?
I guess it was allowed, okay. We had to keep something hold the rear end in on it.
I bring these things up because I want our audience to know just how talented these two guys were as drivers. They didn't win consistently because they were just some guy off the street. They took this racing business very, very seriously. Even though in the beginning they didn't become millionaires racing because the purses were relatively small, in many cases it depended on how many people showed up at the racetrack that night, right, Charlie?
Exactly, but I will say this, Airborne had good crowds because they had such a good racing that I will say this, at a long time we had some really great crowds there. Look at the big race there, and the one time we had that big race. According to the paper, it was 13,000 people, and they had to shut the roads down. People couldn't get in.
Think about it, folks. 13,000 people. John, wouldn't you like to do that on a given Saturday night?
I know. So if you stop and figure, now Airborne had to bring in had a lot of fans to get that many people to come to that big race.
And they always kept the prices right so you could go in with a family. And there's always a few free tickets to give away on the radio and get people introduced to races. And once we got them there, and once they saw the show, and it was a show, we had them hooked, right, Paul?
That was a very good show. Another thing, what I remember, especially at Airborne, so many people come from United States and for see us, and from Canada too. But after the race, that's all the people come see us. We take a beer sometime. We take a beer, and we leave the track at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, And we are supposed to race Sunday afternoon at Riverside with Charlie and Dick Nephew and all the gang. We have so many fun at Airborne. So many fun.
Meet so many people, and we did in the stands, because you'd sit with the same crew every week, all the people from Treadwell's Mills. I'm not going to call it Wiggletown.
No.
But some of the best friends I've ever met, some of the dearest, long-lasting friends were from that area. A lot of people were into racing from there. There were some great car builders. We mentioned the Gwinnett family and others down through the years. The same bunch of people would go to the track every week and race, and then we'd talk with the drivers after the races were over, and someday we'd go out to lunch the next day and we'd talk about a race for a long time, because you had to unwind. You guys had to unwind. You want to talk about the race just like a boxer.
Right.
He's in a good fight. He wants to talk to somebody about it after.
Exactly. It was just like yourself. How did I get to meet you? It was through racing many years ago. And so is like I say, racing has been very great for me. It has opened a lot of doors, and because at one time, Charlie Trombley, a lot of people knew me. It was just like Paul Cabana in Canada. Everybody knew Paul. So it through the years, it was a lot of hard work, but yet I think it paid off, and I loved every bit of it, really.
Put a lot of miles on your stock cars and on your regular cars getting there, didn't you?
For sure, that's what I said before. If I race 5 times a week, you can imagine how many miles I make during the week, with my mechanic. I keep my mechanic, the guy for 21 years. And after I switched with the new guy who worked for Terry Labonte, Patrick Ozarski. He worked for Terry Labonte now. You can imagine, this young kid, he come with me at 19 years old.
No kidding.
Yeah, I see everything. After that, he's married, they have the child and everything. I see his life completely, And that's, but we talk about the Airborne, and that's a lot of fun at Airborne. But one thing we need to remember all the time, that's we need a good sponsor too. We don't talk. That's what I make now. I work at Granby. I work so many places, I work with the microphone for the sponsor. Like myself with Jean-Claude Fortin, that's 25 years we are together. With money they give me all the time, for prepare my car. But if we don't have the good sponsor, you don't go to the race, especially now, from about last 10 years.
Well, it was important back in those days, and even more so. What do you think about this whole thing? Do you remember any great stories, Jean-Claude?
You mean great stories?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, some I should say, Because, I don't know, it can catch us one time, I used to drive the pace car at the small track in Senaire,
Don't say that to Charlie.
No. And, Jean-Paul had 500 feature, that's a lot, but some he should say thank you to us, Because when we used to drive the pace car, and when people were coming in the pits, if Jean-Paul would stay on the track, we would keep the feet right in the pace car and go around real fast, And Ken would get on the radio, and we usually shut it off, And if Jean-Paul would have come to make a pit stop, would slow down maybe 10 miles an hour, come around the track, Some guy like Butch Lindley and Tiny Lon would remember, what's happening, This guy is going like crazy. And suddenly, he dropped down to 10 miles an hour. There's a lot of good story. We've been with Jean-Paul, like he said, sometime up to 6 times a week, Sunday afternoon and Sunday night. And racing for me been part of my life too, and I enjoy racing. I still go to race every week, I try to get as many races, and for me, it's the best sport,
When it gets in your blood, it gets in your blood. And even though some guys retired early from driving, they still were interested in racing.
Another thing I should like, if I was about sure my son, Daniel, is still in racing business, but he don't like that too much. He started racing, in go-kart. He make 2-3 years after he had 2 children, he changed completely his life. And he's not in the racing business. That's what I should like if he follow what I prepare for him.
Most of our kids don't. They watch us go through it, and they may say, I'd like to try it, and then maybe not. My father was a minister. He wanted me to be a minister, and I ended up a little bit far off the road there. And I don't know, Kevin. Really, you said he tried to drive on a track once and it scared him to death.
Well, just he went to Dover here, but I think actually Kevin would have liked to race. Because he tried to get me when I was back in the late model. He wanted to get back, keep me in it, because normally speaking, it's a father runs, the son can get in it much easier without that, and it just kind of falls into their hands. And I don't know. Sometimes I said to myself, was it worth? I didn't really push it. I didn't really want him to get in there because I guess we always try to protect our own kid and don't want him to get hurt. We were lucky enough, like John, Paul, and I, we never really got hurt. And the biggest fear I ever had in a stock car was fire. I always figured that would have been the worst thing, because back in those days we never had much for suits. Especially, I remember one time I blew a hose off of my modified on pure alcohol and went all over, and I thought it was a radiator, and all the time it was alcohol. Now, that could have just as well ignited, and I would have probably been just roasted right there, but the good Lord kept me safe that night because I coasted in and no fire. And you know what alcohol is when it burns, it's bad.
And when you guys started out, there were no plastic gas tanks either, right? You used regular
No.
metal gas tanks back in the beginning.
Yeah, I'm very lucky. You know, if I make the race of, and I need use about 7 gallon, I put about just 7 gallon, 10 gallon. But so many guys, you know, they need just 5 gallon for make the race, and they put 25 gallon of gas. You know, that's so many guys made that. But at that time, we don't have the good fuel cell that now we have. You know, I talk. About on the road, very bad accident I had, and I hit the wall by the back of my car, you know. I'm very, very lucky. That's the same for me, what Charlie said before. For me, that's just a fire. I don't know if one day, you know, I pass in fire like that, but I'm very, very, very afraid about fires.
Well, that's two of the best drivers there ever been, and that's true. Fuel cells, now they're made of what, neoprene or some kind of
Yes.
plastic
You
now.
can hardly bust them, and they got check valves and everything else. But I'll always say this: I always figured I could survive a crash or a bang. The worst I could do is break a leg or something. But if you're strapped in a car, because I see one guy in Oswego hit the wall and got knocked out, and he crashed, and he sat right there in that car and just roasted. And I never wanted to. That was probably the worst I ever see as far as a stock car.
Not a good feeling. John handed us a list from 1955, and the headline is Plattsburgh, New York, June 19th. That's 4 days after my birthday, in the year I graduated from high school in 1955. Lee Petty
Yes.
topped off the Northern Swing by taking the win in the 100-mile Grand National event at Airborne Speedway, his 5th victory of the year. Look who was second. Buck Baker. Tim Flock was third. Let me see. Bob Wellborn finished 4th. Carl Kruger 5th. I don't remember Carl Kruger.
No, that's a new one to me right there.
Julian Petty, the winner's brother, finished last in the 16-car field. But look at some of these names. Lee Petty, Buck Baker, Tim Flock, Wellborn, Kruger, Henderson. Dave Terrell, I don't remember him either.
I don't remember this Petty either.
Nope. Ted Pritchard, Chick Norris, and Eddie Skinner. Boy, oh boy.
Is that Junior Johnson?
Junior Johnson right there.
You know Junior Johnson.
Oh, my. But money, $1,000 running right there.
Mm-hmm.
Not bad, 1955. You said that was your biggest purse ever, right?
No, the biggest one, I won $2,500 one time, but the average purse was $1,000 was a large purse for us. And because I lost, the biggest purse I would have won was in Lancaster. I was leading that big race. It was a 300 lapper there, and 10 laps from the end, the engine let go. So that, we felt good about that.
I guess those were the biggest races they ran here, twin 100s, right, back in those days?
Yeah.
200 laps? Or?
I think, no, they make sometimes they made the 300 laps now,
Did
but
they back- no,
oh
back
yeah.
in those days.
Airborne.
Yeah.
Not at Airborne. I don't think you ever had
No,
many
that's
races.
possible.
No, 100 lapper I think was probably about the longest in Airborne. The longest race I ever got in was a 400 lapper in Utica. In Lancaster, I got into 300 lapper. Them were the two longest races I ever got in. But you take a 300 lapper on a hot day in a modified with no power steering, you were beat, because I can remember I took the hide right off my hands. I was so I was leading the race at the halfway mark, and I was totally played out. And I said, "What am I going to do? I'm halfway there." So that's when you got to reach down and get a lots out of yourself.
You wonder that, yeah.
The big race myself, you know, I make a 400 laps, you know, and I win 400 and 300 just in Montreal. You know, we have a 7 Molson 300. I went 5th myself. Another one was a win by Tiny Land, and another one I think that's Bobby Allison won the race, you know, at Saner. But I win a lot of 300, and I win the 400 too.
That's a long time, as Charlie says, to be in a car.
Yes.
You got to dig down, way down. The adrenaline is long since gone out of your system.
You imagine, especially at center on the short track,
Oh,
they
yeah.
make about 90 degrees, in you run, and the car was safe, but we don't put enough good stuff in the front of myself, and we go out of this car, sometimes we need the help, for go out. We have completely down at 400 laps.
And back in the old days, you didn't wear a helmet with a radio in it. You weren't talking to your pit crew.
No,
And
we
there
didn't
was
have
a-
much for
There was
helmets.
an
If you look at-
amazing. There was an amazing kind of sign language back in those days between you and your crew, right?
Exactly. All you do is point, and they'd give you a blackboard with signs, like Oxford, Maine. Did you run Oxford? There was some long races there. I remember once I won a race here in Plattsburgh. Paul worked on a car all night. We headed for Oxford in the morning, and I set that little Chevrolet on pole. And that's when they were running Bobby Allison, all those guys running the big modified. But what happened, I could hold my little car pretty wide open and never lifted at all. The big modifieds would spin out. So I actually turned a better time. Billy Wimble said, "What you got in your car, Charlie?" And I said, "I got my little limited Chevy engine." He said, "I can't believe it. I'm sitting here with a 427 Holman Moody, and you're sitting on pole." But sometimes a smaller engine can be just as good as a big engine.
Yeah, and many times.
Especially at Barrie, Vermont, If the time we run with the, with the V6 was faster than 350. The reason the weight was in the back, of the car. But Airborne, the bigger motor, that's normal, but that's a very big track. But now they run with a small engine, they run with 350 with 2-barrel carburetor, completely different. The power is not the same. But that's what Charlie said before. The time, if we go back with the coupe, you imagine, we have about 600 horsepower, 550 like that, and we don't have the good suspension at what I said before. Yeah, and I repeat, that was very dangerous at that time. I don't know the reason. I've just my nose cut, in the racing. You imagine?
Yeah.
Four tires. We didn't have the tires they got today.
Oh my goodness, not even close.
Those M&H here, they were just like a brick. You couldn't hardly wear them out. The only way, when I wanted to get rid of one, I'd run into somebody and smash my tire. That's about the only way I could wear it out.
But a lot of times, after you ran a couple of pretty hard heats and your engine was tired, and boy, there'd be some frantic work in the pits to try to get ready for the feature, right?
Yeah, we at that time we work hard. We pull out the suit and we work. And I work myself.
Oh, sure.
At that time, I build my motor myself, and I build the car, but I build my motor myself too. Claude Favreau, you don't give me the good help, but you imagine you repair your car during the practice or like that, and you go for the race. I remember one time at Quebec City, I broke the motor a Saturday night. In Quebec City, you imagine I live at that time at Belague. We come back during the night. I make a motor myself. I go sleep for about 1 hour. They put the motor together. We go back to Quebec, but we have 2 racetracks at Quebec City, and I win the race Sunday afternoon with the motor I built during the night.
With 1 hour sleep.
But after that, the time I come back, I sleep.
Yeah, I bet you did for a long time. Great
Like
story.
that big race I lost in Lancaster. See, we had to pull that whole engine apart. Paul worked all night building that engine. Now, I remember I ran in the back of the field because I qualified after, because I couldn't qualify because it was a brand new engine. I ran way in the back for quite a while till the lead cars were pretty near catching me. And then I said, well, I better get going, because I had to kind of run my engine in a little bit because you were running hot. And boy, and I started going, and I caught the front cars and took the lead with the car. It was one of the times that my car was really getting around on that track in Lancaster, and which was a fast track. I always could drive a fast track better than a slow track because I guess I didn't have brains enough to slow down. I think one of the hardest tracks I had was Utica Rome, because I never had brains enough to back off enough. I'd go in too hard and I couldn't turn it. And you had to, on the little short slow tracks, you had to learn to just back off and come out hard. But I always drove better on a track going in real hard than fight it and get out, like Airborne. But I was brought up on Airborne, which was a track that you drove wickedly hard going in, because I went by 3/4 of my car just going in on the outside of the number 1 corner, which you've seen me a lot of times, Gordy, going by on the outside. That was my favorite spot to go by a car. And a lot of other drivers, they'll ride and wait to get under, but that was not my style of driving, and because I always busted in on the outside.
For those people who have never been to a good stock car race at Airborne or any of these smaller tracks, you have, I think, if you don't know it by now, by watching this program, you've missed a lot of excitement. I mean, the NASCAR race is one thing, Daytona is one thing, the Indianapolis 500 and all these other great tracks, one thing when you're running that style car. But it's another thing when you're at a small track and you're a fan, you're right there. You're right involved in the racing. You don't need binoculars.
But myself, I like at that time I liked the small track. But all the time I like better the traffic than the high speed. At Airborne, I won a lot of race, but I like better Barrie or I like Cabana at that time. The reason it was a short track and I like the traffic. If I start in the back, I try to go in the front for sure, As soon, that's what we said before too, As soon as the green flag gone, I never had the friend. But after the checker, yeah.
Never had a friend. Once that green flag goes down, and they used to what's the most cars you remember starting a feature at Airborne?
34, 35, I think they were on. The most I ever was Syracuse. Naturally, I remember one time 65 cars. That was terrible.
I'm talking Airborne. 30. You got 35.
eh?
That's what Jean-Paul said. Traffic.
Yeah.
When you got 35 cars in a feature, you got traffic because you got some cars who really don't run so hard, and you got to get by those guys.
Another thing, I don't know if you remember, but at that time, if you are in the top points, you start in the back of the field for the feature.
Very well.
Now that's completely different. You start about 10. The reason that's if you support, especially if you support the championship, you start the most 22nd. About.
We started 22nd for lots because that's where you none qualifiers behind you. We were always the last cars, the highest on the points. Because remember the big race when I got disqualified there, that whole big deal there? I had to start 28th that time. And I think you started second. But I beat you that race.
Oh, I don't remember that. I don't remember that. I remember just the time I beat you.
I said we always remember the best ones. But you remember that I had to start way back right to the end. That was a great. There was no race I wanted to win more than that one that time. But that was the best publicity. Morris Broderick said that was the best thing ever happened to Airborne with all that commotion.
It was, and the fans felt all of this emotion because they knew these drivers. That when you become a fan of anybody in any sport, you understand the personalities and you feel the emotion. And in those stands, I can speak purely as a fan, you were on the edge of your seat every minute, every race, every heat race. You wanted your driver to win. You had your local favorites. If I went back today and watched a race at Airborne, it would take me a few races before I get to know the drivers again, and I wouldn't be surprised that I'd be right in it in short time. Because you had your very special fans and friends, and you knew who they were because they congratulate you and come up to you after the race.
And especially myself, I run for so many years in the United States. I want to say thank you to the American people. They support myself. And at that time, I smoked. I smoked a cigar, and some American bring me the cigar every week.
Really?
Yeah, every week. And I come from Montreal. Imagine. I'm not on my place, I was in the United States, but I have so many friends that they support myself, the American people. I say thank you very much.
Yeah, fans. We talked about fans and sponsors. What would you ever do without them, Charlie?
Exactly. The sponsors, you need the sponsors, and it's like Paul says, I had a lot of fans in Canada. I was the same way as Paul, both ways. But the sponsors is a great thing because without that, we used to do it a little bit better without it because it wasn't quite so much money involved. But today, I think, I don't know, I would never try racing without a good sponsor behind me because I don't think you'd get anywhere without it. I know I got a kid that works in my office for me. He's trying to get into racing and he's doing fairly good, but it's not easy for him, because he's got to almost pour all his money in just to keep this car going. But it's a tough racket, but it's a great racket,
The satisfaction, there's nothing better than a win, right?
One thing, I make myself for so many years. I never take a penny for drive. If we make $500 one night, we put all the time at the bank. We have a guy like Benoit. He take care of that, and we run for so many years with the money we win. The reason nobody receive money for the pay, nobody. And we have a good sponsor. Jean-Claude was there too. He helped me, but that's only one way you can go to the race now. But if you don't pay the driver, if you pay the driver, you pay the mechanic, you pay everything, you go there for 1 year or 2 years or like that. Or if you are a very rich man, but I never had too much money, myself. But I like the race, and that deal we make, we put all the money at the same place. We go to the race for the last about 20 years.
That's true. You didn't make much money driving either, did you?
Gordy, I would have never went very far in my money because I did the same thing as Paul. Our money went in and just to make another car. We saved up everything we could get to be prepared for next year, and that's exactly the same way. Our money just went in. Everybody almost had to foot their own bill. It's like Paul. He worked very hard. He had to work on the cars and stuff. He made very little money. It was just mostly for glory. And that's most of us why we're doing it, for glory, because we love the sport. But nowadays, the guys like Earnhardt and Gordon and them, we're way ahead of the game. We should have been in this category, and then we could have made some money. These guys, although I still firmly believe that they deserve it, because for a lot of years we did not get paid. Basketball players got millions of dollars. Anybody else could make $1 million, and a poor driver couldn't make no money. They're finally starting to get paid since TV has came on. That I believe a stock car driver is as good an athlete as anybody plays any other sport. And they
Talked about that. Driving 400 laps, you gotta be in pretty good physical shape.
Yeah.
You gotta have a very strong mental attitude. And physically, you guys were strong people. You had to be.
You could not take many breaks, because I remember one time, I don't know if you remember that old track in Vermont. It was a drive-in theater. And I was coming up the back stretch, and for some reason, it was something that when you'd come up the back stretch, you could see the movie. And I guess it must have been a nice animal or something on the thing. I took my eyes off the track just that one split second. The first guy, we're right off number 3/4. I'm back there trying to get back on the car.
Watching a drive-in movie and driving a stock car race probably wouldn't have very good.
I never looked at it. That's the reason I went so many races at Cabana.
I want to mention a few other people, some names we may have forgotten along the way, and we apologize for that, because we're just kind of winging it here. We didn't take notes when we started this program. But I do want to mention Bob Mackey, who is a very good friend of mine, who was always around the track, who took thousands and thousands of pictures. He was responsible for dealing with the newspapers, and he was quite a guy. And those pictures, if we could find them, his widow showed me a lot of those pictures and gave me an album of old pictures just because I happened to be in a couple of them standing by the side of the track broadcasting. I couldn't find them for this program tonight, but there were people like that who supported racing, and there were no bigger fans than Bob Mackey and his wife back in those days.
That's right. And it's like Mr. Stone in Champlain's the same way. He's got a bunch of films, the old type films, but they keeps telling me he's going to dig them out and give them to me, and I got to make a point to try to get them, because I think it would be interesting. Watch the old coops go through the dirt and stuff. I realize the cameras are probably not as good as what Calvin has got here, but it would still be fun to watch it.
I think we can do that. We have found that some of our most successful programs contain old footage. We did a history of the CVPH Medical Center in town, and we found some old film from 1927, maybe, Calvin, or back in the 1920s, of the old Physicians Hospital. And we got doctors and old-time nurses and people coming up wanting copies of it. If we can ever get some of that old racing footage, you have any old film at home that...
Not too much, I give the film to so many people, For look, they never give me back, they keep for them.
Good friends, right?
I don't know if you tell that, good friend.
But they got to be around.
I will try to get Mr. Stone to give me those films if we ever, I'll let you see them, and we'll see what we can do with some of them. It would be interesting, because this goes way back in the first days of Airborne, so it would be very good for Airborne.
Because there are plenty of ways to put that old 8mm film on videotape, on VHS tape, which we could do, and that'll just whet the appetites of some of our viewers for a future time. In the time remaining, I just want to show a couple of these pictures here, because some of these are really great. And I don't know why that can't be 99 on its side again there, Charlie, can it?
That must have been the same picture. It can't be
It's gotta
twice.
be a different view of the same
That's
picture.
right, because I couldn't tip twice over one. Only the best I ever did was 3 in one day.
Oh, 3 in one day?
That was the best I ever did.
What's the most times you ever rolled over? Sometimes those cars would roll over 4, 5, 6 times, I
Malta.
know.
I went 6 times, a long time in Malta.
6 times? How about you?
I'm very lucky, not too much. I just go down of the track about 20 feet lower than the track, and I cut my nose at that time.
There were some
But,
dangerous places on
yeah.
some of these tracks. You'd have woods and Airborne in the backstretch. I mean, I've seen cars go off in the backstretch and you couldn't find them for 20 minutes down in turn 3.
Exactly. When you missed a track there, if something happened, you were down a long ways in there. And Riverside was a dangerous track too, because when you come out of 1 and 2 corner, mostly 2 there, boy, you run up into the wall. I know my brother hit the wall one time. He had a 2x4 or something right up through the windshield, right by him. Boom! Could have just as well, if it had hit him in the chest or something. Who knows?
You saw that large picture of Airborne in 1967. You saw that there was a fairly sizable fence there, but when you had parts that started flying off cars like a front end or a wheel assembly, I saw one wheel assembly go up in the stands once at Airborne. I don't remember if you were there on that night. And there were some injuries. Nobody's killed or anything, I don't think, at Airborne. But boy, the fans would scatter when the parts started coming up, when wheels started coming up into the stands.
Yeah, but now they changed that. That's very better. But I remember, at Airborne, we have the tree in the back of the stretch, and I see that a couple of times. And one night I remember now that we talk about that. The car was very, very big damage, no axle in the front, nothing, everything was gone. But they have some wood, some tree on the back of the stretch. They don't have the good wall at that time, That was very, very dangerous.
Because they had, at one time, had nothing but railroad tiles. Boy, and if you hooked, that was bad, because you didn't glance off it like these cement walls. Boy, when you'd hook a wheel in that, you were in trouble.
Yeah, once you'd wreck your front end, you were in big trouble. That wasn't as easy as putting a new carburetor on, was it?
Yeah, but just change the parts, for finish the race. Some night, sometime, we ask about all the driver. They have some axle, some parts, and if the guy, I remember Charlie gave me a lot of parts, and do I give you back the week after?
You mama did. I'm sure I got them back, one way or the other.
Like I said, there was fierce competition, but there was camaraderie. I mean, these guys were friends. Another name we haven't even mentioned tonight is our good friend Mackie Miller, who hasn't been well lately. We want to wish him the best and hope he gets a chance to see this. One of the most colorful local drivers. He didn't always run fast, but he was always good for excitement in the fans. Oh, good old Mackie.
Exactly.
His family and friends are all friends of mine, and some of the other drivers out there that are still around. I see Bob Bruno. Bob Bruno,
good
quite
driver.
often. Bob was one of the great drivers for many years.
Love to run against Bob because he was a good, clean driver. You had Paul, Bob, and Andre Manning was a good, he was a good
Very
guy. Goddard and all them guys, they were great guys to drive against.
Yeah. And Bob Brunel was involved from, he started pretty early.
Yeah.
And I don't know, but might still be racing, isn't he?
But Bob Brunel raced at my time, Charlie, not in yours.
I stayed around longer than you did.
Well, you're going to hear those names later in the interviews that Calvin did before we actually started this program tonight, and talking about some of the very early days at Airborne, how hard it was to get it started, how the tough times were, how it changed ownership, how the fans weren't quite sure what the track was going to be like. You saw that picture and how hard they worked to make that a good track way back in the beginning. And we love to eat that dust up there. And boy, the more dust we got, the better we liked it.
Yeah, a lot of people don't even know the first 3 guys that actually started Airborne. Lyman Burnell was one of the originals.
Oh, my goodness. Yes.
And very seldom we mention Lyman, but he actually was one of the originals. Then Vic Wolf got in later, and Morris and all them. But it's got a real good history, Airborne has.
Well, I'll tell you what, we're going to save a lot of these other pictures for another time and place. These are great. We're going to get together some of those 8mm films. You promised me And you've never broken a promise yet, you little hound dog, you. And we'll get some of those old pictures. I promise to dig in, find some of my old photographs, and we'll do chapter 2, and who knows, maybe if John's still around, and we know he hopes to be around a lot longer than we are, we'll do maybe a chapter 3 and 4. We hope we've given you a lot of excitement during the course of this program, and I hope you stay tuned for the rest of it. You're going to love every minute of it. Now we're gonna show you some footage of Morris Broderick and Tom Curley, two people very instrumental in the history of this Airborne International Speedway near Plattsburgh. For our viewers who haven't seen the Speedway, you ought to go see it sometime. Get yourself involved in racing as a fan or even as a driver if you've got the skills and the guts that these guys have had that we've interviewed tonight. That's wonderful. I don't know if you heard Jean-Paul Cabana say that he won the first feature at Catamount when it opened, and all those years later, he won the last feature. And John was mentioning an anecdote that I think is a big part of history that shows what a big heart this guy has. During the last several laps of that last feature he drove in, he could hardly see the track because he was crying. His heart was filled with emotion, celebrating all those years there. You can imagine that feeling. These guys are champions and always will be in my mind, and I hope your mind too. On to the next segment of our program, and I hope you enjoy the interview with Calvin and a couple of guys who had a big role in the history of Airborne. John Walker, did that interview that you watched us do through the course of this evening, was that a little different than you expected, better or worse, or what?
I couldn't expect it. I just sat there in amazement, and those guys are like you said, true champions, true role models. What an interview. What an interview. I could listen to this for 10 hours.
Well, who knows? By the time we finish, we may end up with 10 hours. It's been a lot of fun for me. Calvin knew it would be because I've talked about stock car racing and these guys ever since I've known him, and that's for a long, long time. So this was a great kick for me. Never could I get more into an interview than I was with these two guys. It's just terrific. And you as a young person with your energy, thank you for promoting this local track. And I hope it does extremely well in the future because stock car racing in Plattsburgh is here to stay.
Well, Airborne, as John Paul said and Mr. Trombley said, there was a big rivalry. They raced hard. They were friends. It was family-oriented, and it's still that today. There's a lot of families involved with racing as far as working on cars. There's a lot of friends passing cars back and forth in time of need, and there's a lot of friends in the stands also. They get along good. They meet people. They have a good time. So I hope Airborne's around as long as I am anyway, and if I have any part of it, maybe I can make it go longer.
I'm sure you will. And I want to thank all the fans and the sponsors, two very important parts of racing in the North Country, for your support over the years, because many of you people out there are friends of mine because of racing and because you're just plain good folks. And who knows where we're going to be next time for our little corner.